So I did say I would do a video about this, and to be honest, I am actually quite pleased with my audience. We'll go through over some of the comments as well because I think some of them are actually quite worth um, discussing on this. And as I said, if you want to have a conversation about this with me, I am more than happy to have a conversation about this. More than happy to do so. Um, I think again, as I've said before, having conversations is a good thing. I am more than happy to. So if you want to have a conversation about this, let me know. We can sort something out. But I want to go over this because obviously I asked a very simple question and I gave essentially two answers. And I basically laid it out really how it is. So it's a first past the post system, and Reform UK has consistently high voter turnout. Do you risk voting for Jeremy Corbyn or vote tactically? And I think this is a valid question to ask. Now, bear in mind the next general election is going to be in 2029. That is still, a long time away. A long time away. A lot can happen between, now and then. Um, so we don't know what the political landscape may look like in 2029. Nigel Farage could have had a catastrophic collapse, and maybe somehow the Tory party has come back from that. Who knows? Who knows? But anything could happen seriously between now and then. But given, of course, as I said, the reality, we live in a first past the post system. This is not good for new parties or small parties as this is. You look at all the polls of what predicted of when people were doing this, and it roughly works about to 10% of the vote. And as I've said before, how does this work out in our system? Because to win in our system, it's not that you just need the votes, it's you need to win the seats. And despite all the fact that people on the left and on the right have been calling this a very, quote, loveless landslide, Keir Starmer won all those seats. It might have been on a small majority, but that doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you are fighting at least like 600 individual battles to win that seat. And in that, all those contests, it is winner take all. There is no prize for coming second place. That is it. So, how does that 10% work out across the country? Does that actually translate into any seats? I don't think it does. I don't think it does at all. I think the worst thing for the Jeremy Corbyn party is going to be that some people are going to vote that basically to make themselves feel better. Because we've seen this before. We've seen people who have justified, even in America, they didn't vote between when their choice was between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump because they, quote, couldn't bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris would have been infinitely better than Donald Trump 10 times over. And sometimes you've got to go for what party is going to do the least amount of harm. And I am quite glad this because we actually got quite a good number of people voting in this. We had over 336 people vote. 28% of them voted for, said they would vote for Jeremy Corbyn under that situation. And then 72% said they would vote tactically. I am really glad that the message of voting tactically has gotten through. This is something that, when I looked at, the whole, make your votes matter, you've got to vote tactically, it was really the last election where that seemed to finally sink in, where if you want to beat these people, especially beat the Tories, you've got to get them to, got to get rid of them. And then what you do is you then got to work. You've then got to try and influence the current party in power. And that is where I think that is falling down. I think there's a lot of people who seem to think you can't do that when you can do that quite significantly on that. So let's go through some of these comments because I think some of them are worth voting. Someone said here, the first comment I've come to. Again, vote tactically. I live in Sunderland, which has been Labour since World War II, but the threat of reform is very real here. That is the situation. Do you risk voting for Jeremy Corbyn to make yourself feel good in a way, but you end up with a Reform MP, you end up with a Reform government for the next 4 years? How much damage is that going to do? That is going to do a lot of damage. A lot of damage. The next one is, I'm still prepared to hold my nose to vote Labour, but they're making it really effing hard. I would always vote tactically. Be it, again, your two main choices still really are, in many of these places, Labour or Lib Dem. You want to beat Reform. And I will say this now, any Labour MP is like 100 times better than anyone for Reform. Continuing, of course, from the last one, the Labour Party is, of course, making voting for them, of course, increasingly difficult. At some point, the ask will be too much. Well, your choice then becomes: do you want a Reform government, or do you want another party? Do you want to make sure that they don't get in? Because I would infinitely prefer, another 4 years of Keir Starmer than 4 years of Nigel Farage. Make no mistake on that. Someone else comes. It's, of course, a very difficult issue. If you vote tactically, you are stopping, of course, a worse party winning the seat in your constituency. Again, very true. If you, of course, vote for Corbyn or even Green, you are splitting the left-wing vote. But by not voting for them, you are also reinforcing the status quo of British politics, and Labour will keep drifting rightwards because they don't see any support for the left or politics. So voting tactically might save us, of course, from reform in 2029, but voting for Corbyn may, of course, have long-term benefits. Depends how the vote in 2029 turns out. Why would your vote for Corbyn necessarily result for something better and long-term benefits? I don't think it will. Considering the fact, if you've been watching what's been happening on the periphery, I will tell you this now, it is quite funny because I think there is some serious purity testing going to be going on in this Corbyn party, because I've been seeing a lot of people saying the new Corbyn party should purely be for socialists only. So technically, I'm a socialist, but I know a lot of people would say, especially on the left on this channel, oh, you're not a socialist. I am, but I believe in a lot of socialist policies. I just know that when push comes to shove, sometimes a lot of people in the UK will not vote for socialist policies. You've got to advocate them for a more progressive way. But again, bit of a fun conversation, that indeed. I've also seen people complaining about they're worried that the new Corbyn party is going to become very a socialist conservative party. They're very worried that it might go that way. I've seen other people in, shall we say, certain tanky circles, they want there to be a loyalty oath if you've ever been a member of Labour, or if you were a Labour candidate, a councillor or even an MP, you have to take an oath. That's what they want. They want you to take an oath. And I'll tell you this now, I think, bear in mind, put this phone call in for the future, we will probably be covering at some point in the future a lot of infighting that goes on where this party seriously tries to set up. like I say, I am very tempted to go to that inaugural conference because I wanted to see what happens. I'm just gonna get a front row seat and just watch the chaos unfold. Um, so the other one is as long as people pushing votingly tactically now supported Corbyn's Labour, where it could be tactically win now in the previous elections, instead of encouraging everyone not to vote for them. This was what was said during 2019. There was a message of voting tactically to try and make sure Boris Johnson didn't win. The big problem became was Corbyn and that people didn't want to do that. You know what? Where we've just gone through that comment of someone said, "Oh, really? Making it really difficult." Corbyn made it really difficult for a lot of people to vote Labour, and I said really recently in one of my membership videos, someone once said to me where we had just visited someone who had been diehard Labour, told us they were voting Conservative for the very first ever time, Boris Johnson. That person told me, "Don't worry, when that guy gets to the ballot box, he will never vote blue." And that constituency went to the Conservatives. So, yeah, there's a lot of people on the left who have some really weird view of politics, and I don't think, honestly, they're in reality. I think that's the big split between me and a lot of other people. Um, Someone else here, I said I voted, of course, tactically at the last election. Of course, it worked. We rid ourselves of a Tory with a 22,000 majority. Voting tactically works. Again, does. Where I am is, of course, very traditionally Tory, someone else said, and of course, stayed Tory after the 2025 general election. So I'll be voting tactically for whoever will keep the Tories / Reform UK out. Labour was, of course, placed fifth here last year. So the Corbyn party is a complete irrelevance. Again, very true. For a lot of people, that will be the case. A lot of people will be voting for a party where it has no chance of winning. Yeah, from the archives of, quote, "Let's vote dumb for the second time, just like our overseas cousins did." Again, so I'll see, I can never support Labour in their current state, but then you end up with a reform government and you have to go through God knows how many years of pain. And then are you so sure that somehow the Jeremy Corbyn party, by that point, by what would it be, 2034, 2035, is in a state where it could win? So there's that. Then someone else brings up this. Just remember that Trump, of course, got in because a relatively small number of people who voted for Biden in 2020 couldn't be bothered to vote for Kamala. And now look what the US is dealing with. A vote for Corbyn is a vote that would allow the very same thing to happen here with Farage. Imagine the world with Farage as PM. It would be horrific. I agree. And then someone else is actually, I think, quite a lot to dissect in this one. So I think this is actually quite a good comment. So they say, I would, of course, still vote for Corbyn since Labour has consistently drifted further and further to the right on both social and economic issues. Sure, right now, they're saying they're staying with a more centre-right framework. But if they get voted in again and their, quote, blue Labour rebranding then gets legitimised, they will probably just keep implementing more right-wing reforms anyway. A lot of the things they've done are not entirely right-wing, but there you go. I would disagree with you on that. But the way I see it is that I'm no better off with a Labour government in 2030 than I would be with a Reform government. Oh, no, you would be absolutely better off. absolutely way better off with the Labour government in 2030 than you would be with Reform, because Reform would go hog wild. If they had this type of majority, they would just go hog wild. They would do immeasurable harm. Immeasurable harm. Just look at, the contract that they had as their last election thing. Do you want any of that to get in? You've got Farage saying, going to end, NHS at free at the point of use. How bad would that be for you? Just on that point alone. So it continues. Of course, this could change if Starmer was kicked out. Plus, the way I see it is that in a parliamentary system, we do not need to think in such a binary view. Even if Labour only got 60 seats, Corbyn, say, got 55, the Greens would get 5 to 10. They could equally now collectively hold a sizable resistance to reform simply by cooperating when it's necessary to do so. So that would be what? Let's see, 100, 115, let's say 100, 125. What majority then are you going to give Reform? Because if Reform have a majority government, let's say of even 14, a coalition of like this Labour Corbyn Green alliance would not be able to stop Reform. And if you look at all the polls currently, it's roughly giving Reform at the moment a majority. That's where you've got to worry. That's where you have to worry. And even if you had that, is that really going to be able to hold Reform to account? Don't think so. Don't think so. And how much damage would they then do by 2035, by 2025? Would the NHS no longer be free at the point of use? Considering they are talking about wanting to completely scrap workers' rights as well. Do you really want to risk that? I wouldn't. There is so much stuff that a reform government would do that would just be absolutely god awful terrible. Now, a lot of people I think would learn from that. I think Farage would be done and spent as a political force. To be honest, after that, after a disastrous turn like that, but then you've gone through all that damage. Are people really going to go vote for Jeremy Corbyn? You don't know. It's a big risk. It's a big risk on that. I would not subscribe to that view. That is a big risk. Of course, the final one is JC knows exactly what he is doing. He knows that if his party at least proves moderately popular, he will, of course, open the door for fascism. Why would anybody from the centre or the left even contemplate doing this? My view, unfortunately, is that he is so green-eyed and a maniac because he never got to be the PM and wants to, of course, sabotage Labour at the next GE, regardless of the cost to the UK. He has lost the plot. In politics, you serve the people if you are true. JC used to be a shining example of this, but he is now making it all about him. From a hero of the people to an enemy of the people. Just stop JC. I agree on that one. I very, very much so agree. But yeah, as always, let me know what you think. And if you want to, hop on stream sometime and have a conversation about this, let me know. I would be more than happy to have a conversation about this. It's just how it would be. I think this would be a very interesting conversation to have. My feelings would always be I would vote tactically every single time, because there's no way in a month of Sundays I would want a reformed government. You've been seeing how they've been running these councils, how the new greater mayors are running as well. How on earth do you think a Reform UK government would run? It would be a disaster zone. And as I've said before, just because it doesn't look like they are doing anything does not also not make it good, because they are missing out on grants, they are missing out on money, they are preventing vital decisions from being made by doing nothing. So it all is just as bad. Make no mistake on that. So something to think on, I think. But as always, let me know what you think about this. And of course, as always, links down below. Patreon page, buy me coffee, YouTube thank you button, YouTube membership, all that stuff down below. Click the like and share button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.